My name is Caleb Denby, and I'm going to be taking you through some of the coolest moments from our first 5 rounds and see where the standings fall after 5 rounds of play. In the A group, we have Robbie Kevlishvili as the sole leader after 5 rounds. He's being chased by a few people, Mikhail Antipov, who was off to an early lead but lost in the 5th round. He's also chased by Andrew Hong and Abhimanyu Mishra, who played a marathon game in round 5 that finally ended in a draw. Also in the running is Lazaru Brozone and Ilya Nizhnik, and chasing them is Benjamin Bach, Yeser Quesada, along with Nicholas Theodorou and Victor Gazik. Darius Swiertz is the sole leader here in the B group with 4 out of 5 points. He has won 3 of the 5 games and drawn the other 2. He has a full point lead over second place, which is a variety of players. Thomas Bjerretzen, Nicolosi Kacharava, Dambasur Batsurin, and lastly, Carissa Yip, who is an international master. Carissa is fighting for more than just the $40,000 prize fund here at the Spring Chess Classic. She is fighting for a Grandmaster norm. And as a reminder, the St. Louis Chess Club is offering a $100,000 bounty on the next female player to get the Grandmaster title as part of our Cairns Chess Queens Award. So a lot on the line for Carissa. She's aiming to get her first norm here. She's already got 3 points. She needs just 5.5 total to get that norm. So a lot on the line for her. Rounding out the field, we have Harsha Barathakoti. We have Dimitar Mardov, along with Isik Khan and Luka Budislavojevich, along with Amin Ohanian in the B group. Now let's check out some of those coolest moments from the first 5 rounds. The first round saw Nicholas Theodorou with the white pieces against Ilya Nizhnik in the A group. Ilya is a very strong player, was nearly 2,700 at some point. Since then his rating has dipped a little, but he's still one of the favorites in the A group this year. And Ilya with the black pieces got off to a good start in the opening, ended up winning a pawn, and then we found ourselves at the key moment here. So Ilya has a powerful pawn on c3, meanwhile white has a good pawn on d6, and Ilya here finds a nice idea to discombobulate the white pieces. So that move is f5, and with this, he creates more problems with white, aiming to play e4 and displace that bishop. Nicholas Theodorou was forced to play bishop to b7, not a safe square for that piece. And shortly after, e4, knight d3 comes on the board, and it's time for the knight forks. The queen has to move, king h8, rook c2 to save the rook, and now queen b6 is the nice idea, and you see now that bishop has no comfortable home. Knight to b4 is the threat, winning the exchange, and things soon fell apart for Theodorou, losing that bishop, and shortly after, losing the game. Ilya found some nice tactics here to threaten checkmate on g2. Nico threw one last wrench in the works with rook h8, getting a second queen, but it's not enough, as in this position, white is helpless to stop checkmate after queen f1 check, king to h2, and e3, e2, knight f3 to end the game. So white does stop checkmate by capturing this knight, but then of course the trade, black gets a new queen and is easily winning. So a strong start for Ilya. He's since faltered a little bit and is no longer one of the leaders, but playing some really interesting chess here at the Spring Classic. In round 2, our key moment here is going to be between Isik Khan and Darius Swiertz. So Daro, as he's commonly called, has been having a phenomenal tournament with 4 out of 5 points, and his momentum started to build up here in round number 2. So here he has the black pieces. It's been an interesting opening, and Isik is posing some interesting questions to black, aiming to play something like f6, potentially attack on the king side. But in the meantime, he's neglected some development of his pieces, with the knight somehow returning to g1 earlier in the play. And Daro takes advantage of those pieces by finding the right moment to break things open. So it's all about this bishop. Daro plays the move c4, sacrificing a pawn. After white takes, now he goes e4, offering up a second pawn, but it's clear that white is going to be in a lot of trouble if you start grabbing too many pawns. Rook takes e4 would be met by queen to c6, and black would start collecting. So white plays queen g4 instead, queen c6, and now b3 is the fatal mistake. Greed is not good in this case. White needed to return the pawn, step out of any discovered attacks, and keep the c3 square defended. We'll see after b3, Daro manages to play bishop to e5, and already White is feeling uncomfortable with these pieces locked on the queen side. Rook to b1, knight a2, threatening the fork. Queen takes e4, just allowing black to win the exchange because there is simply nothing better. If you go rook e3, you technically don't lose an exchange yet, but it's clear that something will end up following with your pieces. Something will end up falling with your pieces being so awkward on the queen side. So Isak decides to sacrifice the exchange, but Daro, with very strong technique, ends up collecting these pawns on the queen side with the knights, winning this past a pawn, the last threat in White's position, and then with very strong technique and a long endgame, managed to convert the victory. We see the key moment here. Daro keeps his second pawn on the board to ensure he has enough left to make a queen. And finally, the winning move is g5. Undermining this bishop, you cannot capture, you lose your piece. And with nothing left to stop this pawn coming down the board, Isak resigned here. So a strong start for Daro in round 2. In round number 3, Daro finds himself up against Carissa Yip, who is going for that Grandmaster norm. And after a pretty fun opening, they find themselves in this position. So Daro with the white pieces here just played bishop to d5, putting some pressure on the king side, but more importantly, threatening to lock this knight in place on a5. This knight on the rim is a very double-edged piece. It is pressuring White's weak pawn on c4, but it's in serious danger of getting stuck. So here, Carissa needed to sense the danger, play knight to b3, aiming to take this knight off the board in exchange for one of White's pieces. Instead, she played rook to b1, trading the rooks instead of the knight. And while this isn't losing just yet, she's already in a little bit of trouble. So White simply trades the pieces, Carissa takes back, and now Daro finds this amazing plan of king to f1, and he is just going to slowly but surely walk the king over to the queen side, put both of these pieces into jail, and then win with his abundance of material on the rest of the board. And that's exactly how it happened. Carissa goes rook a1, king e2. Daro plays king to d3, not worried about losing that a pawn. Carissa comes back to a1, and now after king to c2, Carissa tries to bring out her final piece, but this knight is absolutely stuck. No squares to go. This rook cannot get back onto the b file, also entirely trapped. And this bishop, meanwhile, influences the king side, and this rook is going to come in to win after Daro finds the key move here, f4, breaking open the e file and ruining Carissa's day. e4 takes on e4, king f8, king to b2, rook a4, f5, and very shortly here, Carissa threw in the towel. I think she played g6 on purpose, quote-unquote blundering checkmate in one. It's just a fancy way of resigning, I think. You know, why did she resign here? It's one of those positions where you're technically not down many pieces, but it's simply impossible to play a move. This knight can't move, this rook can't move, and, you know, the end is going to come sooner or later. Carissa chose sooner with g6 and treated us to this wonderful-looking checkmate against the king on f8. So Daro continuing the domination in round number 3. Moving on to round number 4, we're again going to take a look at Carissa's game because she managed to bounce back after that tough defeat against Daro in round number 3. Carissa's opponent in round number 4 was Nicolosi Kacharava, and here she's putting on some wonderful pressure out of the opening. You see the rooks doubled up on the c-file, pinning this bishop on c6 to the rook on c8. And I think a lesser player, such as myself, might have been tempted to just capture on c6 here, winning a pawn, but she wanted to sit on the position for just a little bit. That bishop isn't going anywhere, and plays this move h4, a very interesting idea to try and loosen up the kingside pawns. Black plays rook to d3. And again, no need to cave to temptation and take on c6. She goes a4, threatening now b5, winning an entire piece rather than just a pawn. Under the threat of b5, Black tried to play g takes h4, but after bishop takes, rook to b8, bishop takes e7, takes on f3, takes on f3. We see now that Black isn't down a pawn just yet, but after a few short moves, it's total domination on the dark squares for Carissa. She goes bishop d6, Rook to c8 trades off the last defender of black's queen side and manages to win the key pawn here on b7. And now with the very comfortable endgame, a pawn up, she shows wonderful technique. So they went into the rook endgame. Carissa still a pawn up, ends up in this position with the king on h4. And here is the last mistake for Nicolosi. He actually does have a chance to draw the game in a very complicated fashion with rook to a4. So what's going on here? Well, white is threatening to queen the a-pawn, and beyond that, if black stops the a-pawn, white wants to push the f-pawn all the way down the board as well. So the only way to draw here with black is to go ahead and sacrifice your rook for this pawn on a6 in order to achieve a drawn endgame of rook versus pawn. So how can you do that? How can that possibly work? Well, if you go rook to a4, let's say king to e3, getting ready to push this guy. The answer here is to go king h3, pushing our pawn a little bit further. And after white plays a move like a7, for example, we go h4, and then you wait for f4. Now we're going to give check. After something like king d4, it's finally time to play king to g4, a move that looks suicidal at first, because after rook to g8 check, king takes f4, and queens, black is forced to give up the rook. But in this position, our pawn is far enough advanced that we can secure a draw. White is going to have to sacrifice their rook for this pawn as well, very, very shortly after king to g2. Really not a lot to do here. You can play here, but that's only good for a stalemate. So that was Nicolosi's last chance in the game. Critically, he chose rook g6 instead of rook to a4, and after that move, it's all over. You simply need the rook behind the pawn to avoid wasting a tempo with rook to a6. That just takes 2 moves to get the rook over there versus 1 move with rook to a4 directly, along with some other complications. So in the game, Carissa manages to push the f-pawn forward. That h-pawn is nowhere close enough, and trades into this winning rook endgame. With the black king cut off, there's no way to stop white from queening. Black resigns in this position due to the threat of king to e7 with f8 queens coming next. So a wonderful bounce back for Carissa, setting herself up nicely to try and earn that Grandmaster norm. Lastly, in round 5, we have a very interesting game between the Group A leader heading into round 5, Antipov, against Lazaro Bruzon. So Antipov managed to transpose into some kind of A3 Nimzo type position, a very interesting type opening that leads to very unique structures. So here we see a ton of pawns in tension in the center, and Antipov chose to play a very thematic move, but in this case a very wrong move, and it gave away a winning advantage to Lazaro. So the answer here was to simply take on c5, and you're going to go in for some real complications after something like queen to d4 check. Don't think about taking there. Your rook on a8 is hanging. Rook to c8, and something like c6. And it's going to be a fairly balanced fight. White's actually going to be on the better side of things, thanks to the improved king safety that white enjoys. This king on g8 is a little bit airy. White's going to look to double up rooks and make some serious threats. Meanwhile, the king here has a little bit more shelter. You can play something like h3 to stay nice and cozy. What did Antipov do instead? Well, rather than take on c5 and resolve the tension in the center, he plays this move g4. Again, this is very thematic. It opens up this bishop towards black's king, but in this case, the sacrifice of our own king safety is a little too great, and Lazaro pounced on the opportunity. Takes on c4, takes on d4 with check, and now 2 pawns to the good. He manages to switch the attack and go after the white king instead. With checkmate and 1 being threatened, we need that pawn on g2 to help defend against this diagonal. Without it, Antipov puts up a good fight, but isn't able to survive the complications. Goes rook to e8, and it looks like some very serious threats are being made with rook takes f8 and queen to g7 mate being threatened, but Bruzon is not scared. Goes queen d4 check, defending against g7. And after king to f1, brings out the bishop, pushes the pawn, pushes his other pawn, and here Antipov resigns. absolutely powerless to stop the onslaught of pawns, the wall of pawns coming down the board on the queen side. So with that, Lazaro sets himself up nicely in the A group, while Antipov loses his pole position atop the leaderboard. That concludes our look at all the action from the first 5 rounds of the Spring Chess Classic. A ton more happened that we simply don't have time to cover, but I would encourage you all to check out all of the games over at stlouischessclub.org. A lot of very interesting chess being played here in St. Louis. Be sure to tune in for the exciting finale over the next few days of the Spring Chess Classic. Once again, you can follow all the action live at stlouischessclub.org. Thank you so much for watching, and tune in for our final recap next week.